Back up. We're looking good. All right. Okay, cool. We'll just get on to the agenda. So before we get started, I know the abstract. So we're still going to be talking CodeCatalyst. We're still going to be talking about Code Whisper. We had a personalized workshop set up for this event. Unfortunately, due to some service issues, we can't run that personalized event. So we have to take a little bit of pivot on the workshop. If you brought laptops, if you are expecting to do a workshop, we still have a workshop for you. We're just going to have to freelance it a little bit, right? So the workshop will be available for you to run for the next 36 hours. The actual workshop that we're going to be making available today takes about 2 hours to complete. So we're not going to be able to get through everything today, but I do want to highlight and I will demo that process and highlight what the integration between CodeCatalyst and Code Whisper is. So when we get to that slide, all the information for the workshop will be posted. You will be able to still get your hands on. It's just going to be a little bit different than the personalized event that we intended for today. So apologies for that. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm the worst. We have a sponsor tonight. Oh. I forgot to let them go first. My bad. Tony. Oh, can you stop sharing again real quick?
Yeah.
Technology is so hard.
Tony, one of the founders of COD Forecast. I bought the pizza and drinks, so hope you all enjoyed it. So I'm a bootstrap founder, loco here, and we founded this company to help make AWS cost management suck a little bit less for engineers, tech teams at large organizations. So who here has done anything with AWS costs? Anyone here? Raise your hand. It's a nightmare. It sucks. It's terrible. You're funding that guy to go to space. It's complex, it's tedious, it's consuming. Feels like you're building a rocket ship sometimes with spreadsheets. That's a problem we solve. So if you can relate to problems like this, if you guys know the reference, or relate to problems like this, happy to chat with you further offline a little bit more on what we do and how we solve the problem on that side. But today, I don't want to talk too much about us. Whenever we jump on calls as a bootstrap startup, we like to give a lay of the land of other tools out there. We understand, like on our side, we're not going to be the best fit for everyone. We're pretty realistic. We don't like wasting people's time. So just want to give kind of 3 categories of different companies or different types of companies and the tooling that we've seen from those companies that they leverage and use. So let's start with enterprise, especially if this kind of relates to you or might sound familiar, very large and complex, big public company, big bill, 7-8 figures a month, crazy, right? Multi-cloud. And typically we've seen there's an internal full-time dedicated resource to help manage costs there. We like to call these tools that I'm about to bring up the Lamborghinis. They are as expensive as Lamborghinis. They are expensive, but they're very complex, has everything you need to know about your costs, reporting dimensions that are like 100 rows deep, solves everything you need, right? If you're familiar with procurement process of 6 to 12 months, 2 to 3 year contracts, paying 2 to 8% of your AWS bill, these tools are very, very powerful in the space. And a lot of these types of companies leverage these tools from our observation and what we know. More often than not, if you guys know that reference there, I'll give you a free t-shirt. But more often than not, what we find is a lot of the tooling is done internally. A lot of reporting is done internally as well, and they might have a full-time team. If we're spending 7-8 figures a month on AWS, that justifies have someone to monitor and manage the spend and make sure that things are not going haywire. And then next we have mid-market and high growth. Series B plus, 6-7 figure a month on AWS. There's no dedicated full-time resource to manage costs. We like to joke, like the engineering team have been voluntold instead of volunteer that, hey, you're managing costs because you have access to the master payer account. And that's purely the reason why you're managing the AWS costs. So that's where our sweet spot is for Cloud Forecasts. That's where we find ourselves most helpful. We like to call ourselves and other tooling in the space kind of like the Toyota Camrys. Like, it's not sexy. It's not like really cool. Gets you from point A to point B, does the job, does what you need. A lot of these tools solve very specific problems. Like for us, we're really, really good at one thing. We're really good at AWS. If someone comes up to us and be like, hey, do you do GCP, Azure? We're like, see ya, bye. We're not that good. And we'll recommend our competitors. Not as feature rich and complex, but does a really good job in one thing. Typically very user-friendly sales process. For us, we're all about no sales pressure. Like, yeah, free trial works great. If not, cool. Like, we learned a little bit. So these are some of the tools. Once again, AWS provides a lot of great tooling internally. AWS budgets, kudos, Cost Explorer is really good. So a lot of the cost management stuff are up there. And then you have Prosper Ops and usage that does a lot of reserve instance management and auto purchasing there. And then you have early stage startups, pretty early stage, still looking for product market fit, 4 or 5 figures a month on AWS. Obviously no full-time FinOps resource. So I think in this space, what we've always told users, like, it's probably not worth investing the money in a cost management tool. Your bill's really simple. We find that these tools, they're like divvy bikes. Does the job. You can go from point A to point B, get on a bike, gets you to where you need, solves a very simple problem of transportation, everything you need, and who doesn't like free 99, right? AWS, again, provides a lot of great tooling. We also have a free community plan as well for a lot of startups to kind of get started up and running. But we generally tell people, hey, AWS provides what you need for the most part on that side. So this is interesting to you all, and you're like, hey, this is something my company's dealing with, and somebody's asked us about it. These are some great resources that we like to pass along. The keys to AWS optimization is run by someone that works at AWS called Stephanie Gooch. Really in-depth stuff. Like, I really don't like resources where it's just kind of like overarching bullshit and just like gives you nothing. But these are very in-depth stuff that we personally find. We write a lot about things. Last week in AWS, Corey Quinn is really cool as well. Provides a lot of great knowledge. Want to learn more than happy to chat. If you want to chat about Chicago things, food, you want to chat about Chinatown, bootstrap startup, side hustle to building a business, I'll be sticking around, more than happy to chat. So thank you and enjoy the presentation on generative AI.
Good stuff. I'm gonna take you up on talking about food here in a little bit. All right, let me figure out Zoom again and figure out how to reshare my screen. Let's try this again. All right, so I talked a little bit about the pivot on the workshop portion, but we are still here talking about CodeCatalyst, generative AI, and how to accelerate development. So this is kind of the agenda. Go through introduction. I'll introduce myself. I'll talk about why we built what we did in terms of Code Whisperer and CodeCatalyst. What challenges are we looking to solve for customers and the builder community at large? And then we'll go through how to get started building quickly, and then we'll do the hands-on portion. And then we'll call it a wrap. So I am Ryan Bachman. I am a specialist solutions architect at AWS focused on DevOps. I use that in quote because I am a person that has, even though it's in my title, like have learned to like hate the word DevOps. Like it's lost all meaning. I have no idea what DevOps means anymore. I am really passionate about helping companies accelerate their SDLC, right? Like DevOps was this thing that like turned into automation, and there was still a gap between developers and operations and platform engineering and stuff like that. So I like to look at the spectrum end to end. How do we enable developers? How are we setting them up for success to write better code, deliver at a higher velocity, et cetera, et cetera. Been at AWS for a little bit over 4 years, but a long time developer, DevOps, platform engineer, SRE in the startup space. Originally from Chicago, I live in North Carolina, but I am always happy to come back to my hometown. It's been too long. Anyways, that's my introduction. I'm not going to make everybody introduce themselves in the room, but I am interested who is here. I know when asked, How many is this the first user group? I'm interested in what kind of personas we have in this room. Like who are anybody that's a developer, like can call themselves developer. Okay, we got a couple of them. How about even though I was just bad mouthing DevOps, who is a DevOps engineer, platform engineer, SRE, something like that? All right, who is neither one of those? And somebody give me, what is your role in technology? Why are you here to learn about, developer efficiency, SDLC, generative AI? Anyone want to share? Ooh, SysDev? Is that DevOps? SysDev? I don't even know what's SysDev. Oh, somebody on the, all right, I have no idea. Anybody else? No? Just interested in this topic? Security, all right. Perfect. Yeah, I knew there was going to be one. All right. So let's, advancing on here, let's talk about at least the complexity when it just developing applications in general. This isn't necessarily a DevOps thing, not just a developer thing, but here's kind of all the complexity when you think about authoring and releasing code in general, right? So one is tool integration, right? We always talked about like DevOps and CI/CD, and over time, organizations that have been able to successfully automate SDLC inevitably has just a toolbox of things that are integrated, right? Like there's Jenkins and there's Circle CI, and obviously AWS has Code Suite services. But if you look at Code Suite services, if anybody's familiar with Code Suite, it's like 5 or 6 different services. And then there's hundreds of other tools in the space aimed at developers, aimed at observability, aimed at security testing, et cetera, et cetera. So part of the friction or part of the, I think latency added to SDLC is definitely around managing this tool chain of various bespoke technologies and spending a lot of time making sure that they integrate sort of well together. Technology configurations, right? I think this is more not only the configuration of these tools that I just mentioned, but even like managing application configuration or just configuration of build tools, et cetera, right? You spend, again, a lot of time dealing with the minutia of managing all these different technologies within the SDLC. Another one here is environment setup. Hopefully cloud makes that a little bit easier, but managing the differences between dev, test, stage, prod. Even I will even say managing the developer environment as well. Going beyond the resources that you actually deploy to the cloud, software development starts with the development environment, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's resources in the cloud. Most often it's the local IDE. And I know I come from a startup space. I was around when microservices became the big thing. And I remember working at a startup. We had maybe 30 microservices. We chose 15 different languages across those 30 microservices. So like managing an IDE when you're context switching between programming languages, build tools, et cetera, becomes extremely difficult. Release management, we'll talk, that's kind of like the CI/CD. How do you orchestrate that? How do you automate that? Collaboration, right? We're not working in silos. We're not working alone. How do you effectively bring in other teams where you need help? How do you provide visibility in terms of what you're working on? Tools operation, we touched upon that a little bit. Security, application security. There's this movement to shift left, and I don't necessarily like buzzwords, but I think it's very important where how do we enable developers earlier on in the development process to ensure that they are writing their applications according to best practices, and not just organizational best practices, not only to architectural best practices, but how do you make sure that they are adhering to security standards of the organization? Best practices when it comes to security. What kind of tools can we give them to make sure security is really accounted for on day zero? And then just organization consistency, right? Like depending on how your organization is set up, are you spending a lot of time, choosing your own tool chain and kind of reinventing the wheel? Like what kind of organization standards do you have to, again, to enable an organization at scale rather than, allowing certain business units to make their own decisions when it comes to technology or CI/CD? Anything I missed? Anyone else want to kind of call out, frictions within the SDLC? Oh, I'm sorry. Software development lifecycle. So yeah, it's just the lifecycle of how we build software, from authoring code to releasing and the feedback loops there within. So to solve all those challenges, I'm going to talk a little bit about Amazon CodeCatalyst. So Amazon CodeCatalyst is a service that we released at reInvent last year. In a preview, we went GA earlier this year in April, but it is aimed to kind of solve all those challenges. And we'll go through how in a little bit when I do a demo and you get your hands on in the workshop. But it is a platform to unify all the different stages within the software development lifecycle. And that is including how you author code, standardized development environments, opinionated best practices that become codified into easy on-ramps to deploy these large, complex architectures. And it's going to give you all these capabilities within a single platform. Before I kind of go further on the CodeCatalyst, who here works in this? Like, what kind of build tools, what kind of platforms are people here familiar with or use within their organization, or just personally? Like, who uses Jenkins or GitLab or, yeah? Okay, perfect, awesome. Oh, Harness. Okay. Yeah. So what CodeCatalyst is really aimed to do is to kind of, number one, provide a extremely opinionated platform that's going to bring all these things together for AWS, but it's also intended to be extensible. So if you are using other tools in the space, you can think of CodeCatalyst as a way to provide a unified experience on top of these disparate tools that you may or may not be using today. And please, if anybody has questions, don't hesitate to interrupt and ask. So I'm sure by now everybody's heard of generative AI. We've all heard of, I don't know, I can't say GPT, but I'm gonna say everybody's heard of generative. I feel like I can't go a day without talking about generative AI. It's like you gotta say it 3 times and click your heels like the Wizard of Oz. But it is extremely powerful in the development space, and it's becoming more so, right? So here I'm talking about Amazon Code Whisper, which is AWS's generative AI coding companion that is really aimed at increasing efficiency for developers. It is a companion that kind of sits alongside of you while you're writing code in your IDE. And then based on context that you provide in your IDE, it's going to come back with recommendations, again, based on the language or context of your IDE, but that's going to include the language that you're writing in, the open files that you might have in your IDE, even syntax and standards that you have within your file. It's going to all provide that as context. And then where appropriate or where it as some kind of recommendation or insight, it's going to provide that recommendation back to you in real time in the IDE. And where this becomes extremely powerful, and you can kind of see here in the example up here is, I still, right, like take that simple use case, uploading a file to S3 or uploading an object to S3. I still go to the internet and it's like, how do what is the right Bodo command or the API for Bodo? I've done it a billion times. I still go to Bodo to figure that out, or the API docs to figure that out. That kind of boilerplate code that everybody has in their applications is a great use case for something like Code Whisper, because it's trained on millions of lines of code supplied by both Amazon and free to use public sources. And it really does help accelerate the development practice. And we have some data out there where it will increase efficiency by 57%, of course, depending on what you do. But it is a great tool to have in your toolbox, especially if you are writing code. Any questions on Code Whisper? Okay. So what are we doing today? So we're not going to be doing this, but I am going to talk to this because I think this highlights how these two come together. And we will kind of go through a live demo, and then obviously I will provide a link. So if you want to run through the workshop yourself, you'll be able to see these tools, you know, at your disposal for the next 36 hours. So imagine this, and this actually happens to me quite often. It's the end of a sprint. You know, we're an agile development shop, and it's the end of the sprint, and you had a commitment in your sprint. You were going to build a POC, and it's the last day, and you're like, oh man, I had to get this done. I promised this customer that I was going to build this POC, and you don't even know how to get started. And so that's the kind of scenario that we're working through here, or what we would have been working through. And we're going to leverage CodeCatalyst and generative AI to quickly build that POC. And so before, you would have to kind of research what technologies you had to use. How do I deploy this into AWS? What's the right language? You know, that's hours of looking on the internet. That's obviously trying to figure it out. Here, we're going to do this with a couple lines of code and a couple of clicks of the button, and you'll have a full application, you know, in minutes, as opposed to, you know, days or weeks that it might have taken you previously. And this was the scenario. Again, we're not going to do this exact scenario. We were going to build a chat UI. And I will say this too, if you're interested in actually going through this one, I will have my email address available. You can reach out to me, and I can make this one available once it's back in a good working state. And that's kind of the scenario of what we're doing for the workshop. And then I will kind of ad hoc and demo that. Any questions? Do this. All right, so for those that want to actually run through a workshop on CodeCatalyst, grab this URL. It will be available for the next 36 hours. I apologize, I don't have a QR code or anything like that. So if you have a laptop and you are interested in going through this, grab that, and all the instructions you need are on that. And I will just pause for a couple minutes while people decide if they want to go do that. And if you have questions getting started doing this, again, the instructions are there. We have a couple people from AWS that are familiar with Workshop Studio. So if anybody runs into difficulty joining the event or something like that, I trust that you can help them out. Yes. Yeah, I can definitely share these slides. Yep. Okay. And now I will demo a little bit of how these two come. Oh, yep, please. Oh, I'm sorry. No. Yep. Anybody else need time or? Nope. Okay, very good. So let me go into CodeCatalyst, and I will, this will be, you know, obviously live coding, live demo, but I also call out some things about CodeCatalyst that may not be. So let me log out here. And I'll log back in. All right, so this is the landing page. Again, going back to, so this is Amazon CodeCatalyst. This is kind of that developer DevOps platform that we're going to leverage to be more effective, efficient at developing or building on AWS. For those that are familiar with AWS already, this might look a little bit unique. A lot of times when you go into AWS, you're used to a console of AWS services, a selection of 200 something services in the AWS console. This is unique in the sense that it actually lives outside the realm of AWS. Now you can associate CodeCatalyst with your AWS accounts, but for all intents and purposes, this is outside of Amazon. It is also free to use. It does have a free tier, which means you can sign up and do development using CodeCatalyst for free. And there's certain quotas, but that will remain true for the existence of the product. There is a free tier that that lives in perpetuity. It's not like 12 months. This will be free forever. As long as it limits you how many resources you can use in it, but it is free. The other thing you'll notice here, and I will go ahead and sign in. The other call out here, and a lot of this instructions, if you are doing the workshop and you're reading through the instructions, some of these things are included in those instructions. But you'll see here, I land at a builder ID. A builder ID is a new identity resource that AWS built for the purpose of off-console access. If you look at what AWS offers in terms of identity, we traditionally relied on this concept called IAM, right? Identity Access Management. But it doesn't really work well for an individual developer or an individual builder. The attributes you would give to a developer, right? Developers are mobile. They switch between organizations, they switch between projects. And so having an identity actually tied to an individual is actually a very useful thing. So that is what AWS Builder ID is. When you go log into CodeCatalyst for the first time, you can create one yourself. You'll be doing that in the workshop. And all you need is an email address, right? It could be your company's email address, it could be a personal email address, but that's how we create a builder ID. The other good thing about builder IDs, it's not just for CodeCatalyst. I've already mentioned CodeWhisperer and the generative AI coding companion. Creating a builder ID also gives you access to CodeWhisperer, and CodeWhisperer also has a free tier. So if you create a builder ID, you install your toolkit in your favorite IDE, you can use your builder ID to associate to CodeWhisperer and start getting the benefits of generative AI coding companion again for free, if you so choose. If I type my password one-handed, I might have to put that on the mic. Yep. All right, so now I am in CodeCatalyst. And you'll see a bunch of resources here. But I'm interested in building something, right? I'm not going to spend too much deep diving into the product because I'm not here trying to sell the product or trying to. I just want to make sure that the experience comes through. I'm a developer. I want to make sure, or I want to build something. I want to build something quick. Remember, we set the concept as we're building a POC, and so let's get started building. In order to do that, we're going to go ahead and create a project. Now, this is going to get back to some of the challenges that I mentioned earlier in a previous slide. How, as a builder or developer, or even a platform engineer, a sysdev engineer, how do I know, or how do I ensure that I am following best practices? Again, from an architectural standpoint, from a language standpoint, even from an AWS standpoint, we have our own well-architected guidance. So how do I ensure, and how do I keep up with that knowledge? So for that, CodeCatalyst offers these concepts called blueprints. Blueprints are basically project templates with everything that you would need to deploy and build on top on these complex architectures. So within CodeCatalyst today, we have a handful of blueprints. We are, continually adding more, but you'll see here, if you go through the available blueprints, you have different use cases from data pipelines to static websites, et cetera, et cetera. For the workshop, though, we are going to be using, there's a lot in here. A modern 3-tier web application. So we'll go ahead and select this. The other nice thing about blueprints too is they're not static. You can see here that I have some options when I build a project of this modern 3-tier web application. You can see here I have a selection between what compute platform do I want to run my modern 3-tier application on. There's other blueprints here that are a little bit more extensible, such as the single page application. So if you're building a single page application, a front end web application, you might have a preference on what web framework you choose. And so the blueprints are designed in a way to provide you those best practices, to provide you that architecture, but still give you some freedom of choice in terms of how you host that, what languages you use, et cetera, et cetera. Oh, no. Oh. 255. And once I'm in the project here, I'm actually going to switch to a different one that has already been deployed. All right, so I created my 3-tier web application, and now I'm ready to build. So this particular web application, this was actually, so it is a 3-tier web application. You can, I know I didn't show the README. If you're interested, go into the workshop. You'll see a little bit about the architecture. But this is a 3-tier web application, which essentially means, right, it has a front end layer, it has a middle application logic layer, and then it has a data persistent layer. So we're using, I think, S3, we have a Lambda, and then we have a DynamoDB table. And the blueprint that we created or used set up all this for us, right? So if we go in and we look at the source repo, you start seeing this was all given to us with a couple clicks of the button, right? We have all our infrastructure as code with CDK already provided to define this complex architecture. We have tests for unit tests and integration tests. We have our web source code as well as our application source code, all provided, right? So AWS is going to provide a lot of this boilerplate concepts for you to get started on these complex architectures. And these are intended to be starters, right? Like they're not necessarily full-featured applications. Very much they are hello world, right? We don't know your business logic. We don't know the features that you are trying to add for your customers. We want to really focus on use cases and architectures, provide you enough to get started, and then allow you to expand on top of that. Now that expansion is where something like Code Whisper comes into play. So for that, I will go into a dev environment. The other thing I'll show here before I go to the dev environments, also part of CodeCatalyst and these blueprints are these deployment pipelines. Again, going back to that original kind of challenges that we're trying to solve for, is this concept of automated CI/CD and helping customers implement best practices within their CI/CD. So within this particular blueprint, you see here that we have a, why can I not, sorry. I don't know why I can't mouse. You can see here that we have a CI/CD pipeline that has run to completion and deployed our running web application. And if I go into the web application, I should be able to see. Oh, sorry, I'm trying to do this one hand. I should be able to see a working front-end web application. And if anyone has seen Mythical Misfits in the past, this is a little bit of throwback. Mythical Misfits, I think, was from 7-8 years ago, part of AWS's app modernization workflow. And so we brought it back in the terms of a CodeCatalyst blueprint. So this is my 3-tier web application. But now let's say I want to extend this. How do I use CodeCatalyst to get started? And then how do I use Code Whisper to add a feature or extend the working blueprint? So for that, we're going to go ahead and create a dev environment. Again, I'm going to refer back to that original slide where I talked about dev environments and the difficulty or the challenge of having a consistent environments. Again, whether that be cloud environments such as Dev Stage Prod, but more so here, I'm talking about the development environment. And so in CodeCatalyst, I now can go in here and get a development environment that is set up and configured for this specific project, right? And that isn't going to include the tools needed to deploy my application. This uses CDK, so it's going to have CDK properly installed and configured with the right dependencies. We're running, this is also a Python application. So, having pip installed and making sure all those dependencies and PyTest is set up correctly. We can do that here, but not necessarily tell developers or organizations which IDs that they have to use. So you can see here, I can spin up a development environment, but I also have the freedom to choose which IDE technology do I want to use to write my code in it. Developers are typically pretty picky, and I know I am, about which IDE that they're going to use. So this is kind of a nice kind of meet in the middle. It's like, hey, we're going to provide that consistent experience, but we're going to allow you that freedom of option in terms of IDE. So I'm just going to go here. Oh, great question. So let me show that real quick. So it uses and this is an open standard. I will open this up real quick. So it uses something, I don't know if you've heard of dev files. It's a dev file, and again, it's an open standard. You can read more on devfile.io. But dev files provide a schema to model what your development environment looks like. And that is everything from, and these are containerized remote development environments. So when you spin up a dev environment, what happens under the cover here in CodeCatalyst is we are going to spin up a container within the CodeCatalyst service ecosystem. And you have complete control of like what image, for instance. So like there's a image declaration. You could have multiple images, right? So the use case I give is like maybe you have certain security tools that you want included in the dev environment. You could add those in this dev file as additional components. So you provide all the tools and automation. So that's how it works, is these IDEs all support this dev file concept. And then in CodeCatalyst, we provide a default dev file if you don't declare one, but if you do, we're going to, as long as you follow the schema, basically use this dev file to spin up any IDE or any development environment that you have for this project. Yeah, so Anaconda is like a Python framework, but this is a little bit more, right? Like it's language agnostic, but it's also like utilities that like might exist outside of your language too, right? So again, like build tools or security tools that might be binaries. Yeah, and the example I'll give here too is, so imagine you're a developer and you're developing a serverless application and you want to develop against Dynamo as an example for the database tier. You can add within this development environment a local Dynamo container, and now that is available for every, and so rather than having to figure out how to, you just codify that and then it spins up a local Dynamo as part of your dev environment. So it's not just for Python like Anaconda, but it's kind of language agnostic. It's more of like modeling the resources used for it. Yeah. No, it's not. It's not a project scaffolding type utility, and that's like building project. That's where that blueprint process came in. Like that's the project scaffolder, and under the covers that uses Progen. If you're familiar with Progen, right? But yeah, it's not going to do the scaffolding like that. What it is going to do is spin up a consistent environment that has, again, like your dependencies already installed, the tools, CLIs, the binaries that you need for local development. Yeah, yep. Any other questions before I do some Code Whisper stuff? Okay, cool. Let me get into my dev environment then. So I'm gonna create one, and I'm just gonna use Cloud9. Actually, I'm gonna use, I'm gonna use Cloud9. All right, let's see. I'm gonna use I'm hoping my VS Code is set up correctly. Let's see if it automatically comes. VS Code shows up better here. So when you use one of these other IDE technologies like VS Code, it will automatically, oh, I should have. Let me get out of VS Code real quick. Yeah. All right, strike that. I don't want to trouble VS Code right now. I'm going to just create one in Cloud9. One sec. And so Cloud9, for those that are not familiar, Cloud9 is a browser-based IDE that is built by AWS. It's really convenient, especially for like, I don't know, developing on the go. I could use like a tablet or even my phone with Cloud9 to, if I am in between places or whatever, and I need to get something done, it's extremely convenient to do in-browser development. All right, so I created this dev environment. This is what Cloud9 looks like. But what you'll see here is, right, I created the project from the blueprint. There was a bunch of source code that was available to me. All that is now automatically checked out, and I can now begin interacting with some of the application code. Now, the original intent of, again, the workshop that I provided doesn't go into building that Lex UI bot. It's more kind of going through CodeCatalyst. But really, what Code Whisper is extremely powerful at doing, rather than the happy path, like, hey, in the workshop, we kind of are guiding you how to build a Lex UI. With generative AI, it's really useful to just think of ideas or features, especially if you don't know, if you're just new to a project, right? You might be new to the language. This particular blueprint uses Python, so you might be new to Python, or you might not be extremely familiar with everything that application or that microservice does. That's where Code Whisper actually is really powerful, because it's going to understand the context of your source files and then make recommendations for you. So it's a great tool also when you're just getting started with a new project or a new language. Code Whisper can really help you, just build or extend on top of what CodeCatalyst offers in its blueprints. To enable CodeCatalyst, Code Whisper, two main codes, you'll see here that it comes pre-installed with the toolkit. So I'm just going to expand the toolkit. I am going to find Code Whisper in the developer tools section. And I'm just going to click start. Start will enable Code Whisper in terms of grabbing suggestions or making suggestions as I type. Because this is using builder IDs, we do need to, right, there is some EULA that has to be agreed to authorize that connection and using that information. And it's just going to automatically create that workflow. So I'll just go through that workflow, which is then going to authorize my connection to, oh man. What in the world? me see if it's. All right, I'm gonna put this microphone down and see if I can type a couple things. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger. And then with, well, let me first, and I will explain this. Yeah, so that's a good question. Potentially, right? Like generative AI is non-deterministic, right? So, I mean, it's all math and probability. Now, there's going to be a standard way to do some of these things. So where there's high confidence that like, hey, there's really one or two ways of doing it, especially when it comes to AWS type resources. Our training against AWS APIs, for instance, are all going to have, one or two flavors. So the possibility of different recommendations, that's just inherent with generative AI because it's non-deterministic. However, as you come across like common use cases where our training is strong, such as the example that I showed earlier where it says like, hey, create a function to upload a file to S3, you are going to see, 99 out of 100 that it kind of generates the same code. I'll also say too, for organizations looking at generative AI, it is all generated, right? Which means you own the code it generates, right? It is completely generative. So it's not a one-to-one copy of the training data, right? And so you don't necessarily have to, you can use it under your own licensing, whatever licensing that you own the code that it generates. Except when we generate, it has a check. So when it generates code that closely aligns with the training data, and that training data had some kind of attribute for a license, it will actually generate a license reference for you. So it says, hey, this was a little bit too close to the training data. That this looks very similar or exact to some of the training data stuff. We'll also show you the license that was associated with that. And then it's up to you as an organization to say, hey, my organization, or I'm comfortable using this code, even though it came from this particular license. So that is a nice feature of Code Whisper. But yeah, short answer to your question, generative AI, I don't know, it's a roll of the dice sometimes. And I am trying to get my IDE to connect to, let me do the old Windows trick and give me a second. That looked better. Okay. All right, let's see if this now comes to. I'm on Code Whisperer. It says I'm connected. There's a key. AWS folks, do either of you remember which the hotkey for Cloud9 and Code Whisper? And that's what you guys on the spot. I'm trying to think of it. Oh, there we go. All right. Just took some time. So you can see here, it's this right here is oh man. Oh, that was a good recommendation. So this well, this is the power of generative AI. Here, let me actually go to a different file. So these lines of code that you can see here, hopefully you can see this. This was a recommendation, and this is again the power of I guess what happens with generative AI. Here again, it's going to make a recommendation, and I can scroll through. Let's see if I can scroll through. So this is the only recommendation here, but this is what it's recommending. Now, this does not appear to be a good use case, but you can accept it. Let me actually try in a different file. Love demoing generative AI. All right, so here we have. Actually, let me go into my models file, maybe. So just I'll provide a kind of a quick explanation of what's in this file. So remember, we had that mythical misfits, and it's really just a grid view of various avatars or characters. Of essentially misfits, and how that works is those are all stored in a Dynamo table, and so we have an object model here that basically supports setters and getters and listing our misfits, etc. And so if I go through this, you'll see here that I have, like, for instance, a delete call that I just haven't deleted or I haven't implemented in my code, right? So you can where you can start using something like Code Whisper is you can right maybe use Code Whisper to implement a delete function, which you might not have implemented, or it's like a new feature or something like that. And how Code Whisper works is through like prompt engineering. So if I kind of come in here and give it a comment, and let me type something here. If I say like, function, so using 0 for 2. Oh, love Code Whisper. But so you kind of get the ideas. You can provide a prompt to Code Whisper, and the idea here would it would generate the code for you. Let me show you something that I know is going to work in the fact of a live demo. Is let me go ahead and create a new file. Open up a blank file. And I'm just going to show you again a little bit about Code Whisper and some of the things it could do. So I'm going to import Boto 3, and then I'm just going to do again to walk you through some of the features, what it looks like, a live demo of kind of that use case that I had on the screen before, where I'm going to say, you know, create a function, upload 3. And here it's going to walk me through creating that function. And this is all going to be random generated, right? So it's going to go ahead and provide some recommendations, and I can choose to accept those recommendations or not. And then it's going to, right? So I can either select and choose it or kind of scroll through the available options. Code Whisper will suggest up to 5 suggestions at a time. So again, depending on what you're trying to do, you can kind of go through and see which one fits your use case. The other thing about Code Whisper too, it is a coding companion, right? Like it can get you all the way there sometimes. Sometimes it could get you only halfway there. But I bring that up is because whatever it does suggest, you do still need to go and verify functionality and make sure it actually works, right? So it is there to accelerate development, not replace development. So all these scary stories about like how generative AI is coming for developers, like maybe one day, but that's not, you know, that's not anytime soon, as you can see. Any questions about Code Whisper or CodeCatalyst? No? Okay. Anybody doing the workshop? Anyone still doing the workshop? No? All right. Did you really? Did you create a builder ID? And nice. Have you used it at all? Have you tried any? Okay. All right. All right. Which ID are you using? What's that? PyCharm. Okay. Yeah, I will. I mean, just you know, we do have a Code Whisperer workshop. Let me actually bring that up. Give me a second. Yeah. Oh. Yeah, so for those that are interested in, I'll also post this in the Zoom. So that's a public workshop. And if you went into the workshop link earlier, you do have an AWS account, again, available to you to use. But there's also a great Code Whisperer workshop as well. So if you're more interested in the Code Whisperer and like the capabilities that Code Whisperer offers, it walks you through a series of prompts. And I'm not going to necessarily show all of them now. But you can see here, it walks you through like different prompts that you could use to try. It's got some various challenges. Also, if you're interested in kind of going through some of these challenges for Code Whisper. But one thing I do want to call out here, and this is where like prompt engineering is becoming a thing, is like writing good prompts is sometimes super important, right? The more accurate, the more specific you are, the better results it will fetch, right? Like, so in my earlier examples, like create a Lexbot, that actually worked fine 2 weeks ago. We're constantly retraining this model. So like what was recommended to me 2 weeks ago appears to be a little bit different today, but it just goes to show the more specific that you are with writing these prompts, the better results that you'll get with Code Whisper. All right. Are there, yeah. Yeah, so Code Whisper actually supports So it supports 5 languages right now. So it's Python, Java, TypeScript, JavaScript, and C#. Is it okay? Oh, nice. Oh yeah. So in the actual Code Whisperer workshop, there I believe it might. Yeah. So it doesn't look like. And I'm not the author. I don't manage this this workshop. It looks like we just have Python. I would imagine Java's coming for this workshop. But again, I think with Code Whisper, if you're yeah, if you're interested in, and I always tell customers that I talk to about Code Whisper, the best way to evaluate Code Whisper is to apply it to your use case, right? Like you'll see in the workshop, you're going to upload objects to S3 bucket. You're going to set some encryption, but you really need to move on to like real world scenarios and stuff like that. And the best is just like start coding, right? Start writing some Java code. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So thanks for calling that out. So and just to kind of maybe explain. So a critical part of Code Whisper is that reference attribution. So when we train, if it is close to our training data set, we are going to supply that license reference for you. And so when we generate a block of code, like multi-line recommendation, that is when we can supply that reference. And so as we onboard other languages, and I think it's like Kotlin and F# and Scala and et cetera, et cetera. So if you don't see the language that you want supported in the official language, it will still generate code. But until we tie those other languages into that reference attribute, we just, right, we can't say we fully support it because that reference attribute is like a critical feature of Code Whisper. All right, any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna go quickly back to CodeCatalyst for a second, right? So imagine here, so we use Code Whisperer, we wrote this function. I'll actually go ahead and commit this back to my branch. Hold on one second. And the other thing I'll say here too is, again, as a developer, and I created this dev environment for, and I created this new file, I didn't have to worry about credentials or authenticating to my my source repo. All of that is managed and configured automatically for CodeCatalyst. So I'm just going to go ahead and set back up. So now I've implemented feature 1, right? I use Code Whisper to generate some code, implement my feature, and then I went ahead and pushed that back up to my project. Now, if I go back into CodeCatalyst, I now have the ability to kind of review those changes and merge that into my code base. So I should now see my feature as a source branch. I can go in and merge that into my destination branch. I can give a nice little title here, feature 1. And then go ahead and create. I will also say, in addition to Code Whisper, we also thinking about in terms of CodeCatalyst, and we don't know what they might be, but thinking about other areas within the SDLC where generative AI can improve development efficiency, right? And Code Whisper is just one of those. Code Whisper, again, is aimed at the developer to help generate code, but there's other areas within the SDLC where generative AI might make sense. And we're looking at how to implement those in something like CodeCatalyst, right? And I'll just give you some examples. These aren't necessarily features, but these are things that we are thinking about. So like using generative AI, for instance, in the ideation process, right? I'm a project manager. I have this project. I don't necessarily know what to work on, what kind of features. And so using something like generative AI within the project management aspect of CodeCatalyst allows PMs to potentially ideate using generative AI on what features should they be thinking about and should they be implementing. Other generative AI things also within the project management space is like this concept of you have an issue, right? So if you're used to, if you're developing, you normally start your developing using like a user story or some acceptance criteria. But what if you can take that user story or that requirements document that the product owner PM wrote and automatically convert that into code? So that's another area that we're exploring, is again taking that user story and then rather than having a developer write the boilerplate for that, automatically generating that first PR associated with that user story. So these are all kind of the generative AI things that we're thinking about in terms of SDLC within CodeCatalyst that we're trying to make investments on as well. And then quickly getting back to CodeCatalyst, I'll get to my PR. You see I have a PR here. And then I can go ahead and just merge it. And I will merge this PR. And then if I go back into the workflow that I showed earlier, beautiful. 5 demos. I probably made, oh wait, that's not the one I want. I don't care about that guy. This guy right here. It's running through my CI/CD workflow, and then eventually, after it runs through all the automated tests and deployment checks and CDK, it will implement or deploy that new feature. So kind of recapping everything that I kind of just demoed here, and hopefully, if you do have time for that workshop, you'll also see is, so we use CodeCatalyst to get quickly started on a particular project. We wanted a serverless application. So we went in and just picked a modern architecture blueprint from CodeCatalyst. It automatically spun up a bunch of resources. It provided me all the starter code with all the tests, a production-ready CI/CD pipeline, and automatically deployed my first pass of that application. Then we quickly went into an IDE. We had access to our code through our browser-based IDE. We used Code Whisperer to generate a feature for us. We committed that in, we merged it. And then if we wait 15 minutes, I mean, obviously it wasn't a real feature, but if we were to wait to 15 minutes, that feature will automatically be deployed. And as a builder or somebody who's just prototyping or as an engineer, I didn't have to think about any of that. I just clicked a couple buttons, I got the application, I wrote the feature, and it'll be in production in 15 minutes. So that's what I had to present to you. I am going to stick around. If you have any questions more about CodeCatalyst, about Code Whisperer, anything in the builder space, that's the area I sit in at AWS. I support really any of the tools or services related to building on AWS. So that's going to be everything from like front end and mobile stuff like Amplify and AppSync to our IAC framework, so CloudFormation and CDK, and then all our other builder tools out there. It's kind of the domain I sit. So if you have any questions in that space or anywhere else, yeah, feel free to ask. Yeah, so good question. So with CodeCatalyst right now, we support, okay, so how CodeCatalyst works, remember I said it's like off AWS console. So it's the Git repo, if you use the native first party capability of CodeCatalyst, is in AWS, but it's in the CodeCatalyst service, right? Like think of it as GitHub, right? Like you go to GitHub, there's a repo, you have no idea where it's stored, it's just somewhere in the cloud. That is CodeCatalyst when you use that. However, we do support how do I say this? So we support integration to other third-party providers. Right now, all we support is GitHub Cloud to date. Coming out, and I can share this, coming out later this year, Q4, maybe an announcement, is integration with other third-party providers when it comes to source. So if you have GitLab or Bitbucket, are probably the two most common ones, those will be supported. Yep. Yes. Code commit. So under the cover, storage of the source is hosted by code commit. So underneath all of CodeCatalyst, think of CodeCatalyst kind of as an abstraction layer to our underlying services. So code commit for source, and then there's other sources. So the main difference is the experience you get on top. So code commit, right, there's native Git protocol. And so CodeCatalyst and code commit are going to feel very much the same, but the experience in terms of like the PR process, commenting on code, that's going to feel a little bit different, right? Like that's not part of the Git protocol. So it's a new UX in CodeCatalyst that you don't get in code commit. The other, I think, technical difference is code commit leverages IAM for authentication, so auth and auth. And you need basically an IAM role to then get a token from code commit, and then you can interact with it. And so we have some helper utilities to make that seamless. In CodeCatalyst, there's like a proxy layer on top of that. And so things like personal access tokens are supported in CodeCatalyst. And a lot of developers are more familiar with those personal access tokens for integration rather than these utilities. And that's another difference. Is so underneath the covers, a lot of it is code suite, but there's plumbing, additional plumbing layer that CodeCatalyst offers, as well as some magic on top that makes usability a little bit more friendly. So CodeStar is it is and it isn't, right? Like, so CodeStar was definitely built with a similar use case. How do we enable organizations to, scale their op by project templates and, setting up the CI/CD and stuff like that. So in that regard, it feels like that. And I guess it is, but like, it also, I think, is a bigger vision than CodeStar was. So CodeStar was really helping you set up the primitives of Code Suite. So it's going to help automate and orchestrate code pipeline and code build, right? Like it's going to wire all those things together, but there was still a lack of a unified experience, even with CodeStar. So I think, so it might be, you might consider it 2.0, but it really has a grander vision than CodeStar ever really did, right? And it's really delivering on that experience layer. Yeah, and plumbing, right? And so I mean, there's a lot of differences, and I can kind of talk to a couple of those differences. So for instance, the workflow engine you see here uses code pipeline to a degree, not all of it, but one of the, I think, limitations of code pipeline is the ability of being flexible in terms of your branching strategy and development. At AWS, we really believe in what's called like trunk-based development or mainline development, where you just have main and then you branch up. But a lot of people have adopted Git flow, for instance, and like feature branch, and that is painful to do in code pipeline. We have solved that in CodeCatalyst, even though we are using code pipeline under the covers. So even though we are leveraging some of those capabilities, we still have some magic sauce that helps close the gap of what maybe some of those native services couldn't do, right? So if you're familiar with Code Suite and it's like, it was really painful to do X, Y, and Z, there's a potential that X, Y, and Z has been solved in CodeCatalyst. And then the other commitment is we're not abandoning Code Suite services, right? Like they are foundational to this product. And there's still a lot of great use cases for using the primitives of Code Suite. So even though they underpin CodeCatalyst, they are still very much an investment at AWS. Appreciate the question though. Any other questions? All right. Well, with that, that's all I had today. I will stick around. If anyone has, again, any questions they'd like to ask me about